It was a quiet evening in Atlanta when I finally closed the lid of my laptop, my fingers aching from the long hours spent writing my latest report. The soft hum of the city outside my window was barely audible as I leaned back in my chair, stretching my arms. The work was done for the day, but my mind couldn't quite settle. I picked up my phone, scrolling mindlessly through the usual notifications. Messages from colleagues, a few reminders, and then I saw it. An incoming message from Olivia. "Good night, darling. See you tomorrow." The words themselves weren't unusual. In fact, they were exactly the kind of sweet, mundane note she often sent before bed. But something about this one sent a chill down my spine. I had just spoken to Olivia a few hours ago. We had shared dinner, laughed at something silly on TV, and then she left for a workout session. Her message didn't make sense. Why the formality? Why the distance? Why the odd choice of words? I stared at the screen, my heart beating a little faster as my mind raced. The message was simple, but it felt wrong. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but there was something unsettling about it. It wasn't the tone, but the timing. She wasn't the type to send a goodnight message so early, especially when we had just spoken. It was almost as if she was talking to someone else, someone she wasn't speaking to me as. My thoughts wandered back to the last few months. The subtle changes in Olivia. She had become more distant, more secretive. She had started going out more, attending social events with friends I had never met or barely knew. When I asked her about it, she would brush me off with vague answers, telling me it was just a work thing or a catch-up with old friends. But the silence that followed those brief exchanges lingered. I didn't want to be the jealous husband, the one who saw ghosts where none existed, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. The feeling had started small, like a shadow on the edge of my thoughts. But now it was undeniable. Something was changing between us. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. This wasn't like me. I wasn't the type to dwell on doubt. But there it was, gnawing at me. Olivia had always been honest with me, or so I thought. I had to trust her. But now, with this simple message, my trust was wavering. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I closed the message without responding and put my phone down on the desk. It sat there, staring back at me, as if it were mocking my hesitation. Should I confront her about it? Should I ask her why she seemed so distant? I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear the answers. What if I was just imagining things? What if it was nothing more than a miscommunication? But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore this. There was too much uncertainty building up. Too many moments that hadn't quite made sense. The next few days passed in a haze of uncertainty. Olivia's behavior didn't change much, but every time she glanced at her phone, every time she seemed a little too eager to leave the room or cut our conversation short, I couldn't help but wonder. Was I just overthinking it? Or was there something she wasn't telling me? I told myself I was just being paranoid. I had to be. Olivia was the love of my life. We had been through so much together. But then why couldn't I shake the feeling that I was losing her? That night, when she went to the gym, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let my suspicions eat me up. I needed answers. I wasn't going to confront her just yet. I wasn't ready to make a scene. But I had to know more. I had to look deeper. I told myself it was a bad idea, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to go through her phone. I tried to be careful, try not to feel guilty for what I was about to do. But my curiosity outweighed everything else. I found her phone on the kitchen counter, plugged in and charging. She had left it unattended, something that didn't happen often. A small part of me screamed to put it back, to let things be, but the rest of me was already reaching for it. I opened her messages. My heart dropped. I didn't need to look far. There they were, messages between Olivia and Brian, a colleague of hers. Messages that were more than just professional. Words that were too familiar, too affectionate. A casual exchange of jokes, followed by something that made my stomach twist, a comment about how much they missed each other. I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. I wasn't ready for this, but it was real. My hand shook, the phone slipping slightly from my grasp as I stood there, staring at the messages. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I thought I might suffocate. How could Olivia, the woman I had trusted with everything, be sending these messages? My mind screamed for answers, but the only thing I could think about was the deep ache in my chest. I couldn't do anything right then. I couldn't act on impulse. I needed to process this to think. I had to be careful. If Olivia was involved in something with Brian, I couldn't risk making a rash decision. I put the phone down and walked away, my thoughts swirling. I couldn't confront her yet. Not without more evidence. I had to gather everything I could. I wasn't going to let this go unanswered. But the weight of what I had just discovered was already crushing me. I didn't know how to move forward from here. All I knew was that the path ahead was no longer clear. I had to make a choice, but first, I had to know the truth. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't escape the image of those messages on Olivia's phone, or the sickening realization that the woman I'd spent years with, shared everything with, was hiding something from me. A part of me wanted to scream at her, to confront her in that moment of betrayal, but I knew I had to be smarter than that. If I was going to make any decision, I needed more than just a glimpse into her private conversations. I needed proof. I didn't talk to Olivia much in the days after discovering the messages. I could feel the tension building between us, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. She seemed oblivious, or at least acted as if nothing was wrong. I didn't know if she suspected that I knew anything, but she wasn't acting any differently, except, of course, for the fact that she was still more distant than usual. She was always on her phone, more often than not in another room, her back turned to me whenever I tried to engage her in conversation. I tried to keep my composure. I told myself I wasn't going to act on emotion. I couldn't just storm into a confrontation without understanding what was really going on. My mind raced as I plotted my next move. I had to gather more evidence, something concrete. I needed to be sure before I made any decisions that could change everything. It was on one of those rare, quiet evenings when Olivia went out for a late dinner with a friend that I found myself standing in front of her bedroom closet, staring at the small pile of clothes scattered across the floor. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but the curiosity gnawed at me. I needed more. I knew I could go through her phone again, but I felt like that would be crossing a line. Instead, I began to search for anything out of the ordinary. As I dug through her personal things, I came across a receipt for an upscale restaurant I didn't recognize. I paused for a moment, reading the date just 2 days before, and then looked at the name printed at the top, the Waverly. I'd never heard of the place, and I couldn't recall Olivia ever mentioning it. It didn't seem like a typical place she'd go with her friends. I shoved the receipt back in her drawer and stood still for a moment, trying to steady my breath. This wasn't the first time I'd found something that didn't add up. There were other signs, the late-night calls, the extra time at work, the frequent absences. I couldn't deny the feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to keep up with work and life while my mind kept circling back to Olivia. Every moment of distance between us felt like an eternity. Every time she glanced at her phone, every time she left the house, my thoughts spiraled further. I had to make a choice. I knew it. I couldn't let this drag on any longer. But I wasn't ready to confront her just yet. I needed more. I needed something undeniable. That's when I reached out to a private investigator. The decision felt like a last resort, but I couldn't shake the idea that I was missing something. I couldn't make any accusations without knowing for sure. So I hired someone to follow Olivia, to gather information, to do what I couldn't. The investigator was discreet, professional. He promised results. For the next week, I followed the investigator's updates, trying to suppress the dread creeping in. Olivia had gone to a few meetings, met with friends I didn't know, and then one afternoon, the investigator sent me a message with a single piece of information that stopped me cold. Olivia and Brian were seen together at the Waverly. They were there for over 2 hours. No sign of anyone else. I stared at the message, the words dancing in front of me like some kind of cruel joke. 2 hours. It was more than a casual meeting. My stomach twisted, and the room seemed to close in on me. I had suspected something was off, but now there it was, right in front of me. The evidence I had been looking for. I didn't know what to do with this new piece of information. My head spun with conflicting emotions. Anger, betrayal, fear. All the things I'd been holding inside for weeks came rushing forward, threatening to overwhelm me. But I had to keep my head. I couldn't let this emotion cloud my judgment. I had to think. I couldn't just turn a blind eye to this anymore. It was time to confront Olivia. But first, I had to get all the pieces of the puzzle. I couldn't allow myself to be fooled any longer. The private investigator had done his job. Now, it was up to me to decide what to do with what I had learned. I couldn't keep living in this limbo. My trust had been shattered, and with it, my sense of what was real. There was no going back now. I had the proof I needed. I'd gone from suspicion to certainty, and now there was no turning back. It felt like the weight of 1,000 pounds was pressing down on me, but at the same time, a part of me felt a twisted sense of relief. The silence between Olivia and me had been unbearable. It wasn't just the distance between us physically, but the emotional divide that had only grown wider in recent months. This was the final confirmation of what I had feared all along. But knowing the truth didn't make things any easier. If anything, it made the situation even more complicated. I spent the next few days trying to come to terms with everything I had learned. Olivia had always been my rock, my partner. The thought of confronting her felt impossible. It felt like a betrayal in itself, but I also knew that I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. It wasn't just about the affair with Brian. It was about the life we had built together, the dreams we had shared. The foundation had cracked, and now I had to decide whether to walk away or try to fix something that might never be the same again. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. My mind kept replaying the same questions. Why? What had happened between us? Had I missed something? Had she already checked out of this relationship long before I noticed? The answers weren't easy to find. On the fourth day after the investigator's message, I made the decision. I was going to confront Olivia, but I wouldn't do it without being prepared. I couldn't risk going into this blind. I had to make sure I had everything, every scrap of evidence, before we sat down and had the conversation that would change everything. I called the lawyer I'd reached out to a week earlier. We set up a meeting for that afternoon. When I arrived at the office, I was a mess. My hands were clammy, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked into the sterile, white-walled office and sat down, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The lawyer, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, listened to me as I explained the situation. "You're not the first person to go through something like this," she said, her tone steady. "But you need to understand something very important. When emotions are involved, decisions can be clouded. You need to be sure you want to go down this path." I nodded, my throat tight. I had no other choice. The lawyer went over the legalities of divorce, the paperwork, the assets I needed to consider, and the steps I would need to take. I wasn't interested in the details at that moment, but I had to listen. If I was going to move forward with this, I needed to understand the process. "Take your time," she said after we'd finished talking. "You don't have to make a decision today, but when you're ready, we'll be here to help." I left the office in a daze. The weight of the conversation settled on me like a heavy fog. I felt like I was walking in a dream, unable to see clearly. That night, Olivia came home late, just as she always did. She didn't say much as she walked in the door. She was tired, worn out from another long day. I watched her as she moved around the kitchen, making herself a snack. She didn't seem to notice me standing in the doorway, her mind seemingly elsewhere. I could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken words hanging in the air. I took a deep breath and walked into the kitchen. "Olivia," I said, my voice low but firm. "We need to talk." She froze for a moment, her back still turned to me. I could see her shoulders tense. "About what?" I swallowed hard, trying to steady my emotions. "About everything. About you, about me, about us." She didn't answer immediately. She set her snack down and slowly turned to face me. Her eyes flickered briefly with something. Regret? Guilt? But whatever it was, it quickly faded into something else. Something unreadable. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said softly, but there was a slight tremor in her voice. "What's going on, Mark?" I didn't hesitate. I walked over to the counter, grabbed my phone, and set it down in front of her. She looked at it without picking it up, a flicker of recognition crossing her face when she saw the message from Brian on the screen. "Why were you at the Waverly with him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She froze, her eyes widening slightly. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I didn't need her to say anything. The silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. I watched her process the question, the reality of it sinking in. "Mark." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, but the look in her eyes, pain, guilt, something else, told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't denying it. "You've been seeing him," I said, unable to mask the hurt in my tone. "Behind my back. You've been lying to me, Olivia." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she wiped them away quickly, as if trying to maintain control. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice cracking. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." I took a step back, my chest tightening. "Then how was it supposed to happen? What were you expecting me to believe, Olivia? That this was just some mistake?" Her face twisted with emotion, but she didn't answer. Instead, she looked away, staring down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't know what you want me to say, Mark," she whispered. "I wanted answers. I wanted everything to make sense. But the truth was, no matter how much I needed closure, no matter how much I needed to hear her explanation, I already knew what had happened. The betrayal had already been laid bare. There was no going back now. I took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "I think I know everything I need to know." I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. I didn't look back. What was left to say? The days that followed felt like a blur of numbness. Every conversation I had with Olivia, every glance we exchanged, seemed like a distant echo of the life we used to share. We barely spoke after that night. When we did, it was awkward, filled with tension and empty words that neither of us meant. There was no going back. The trust between us was shattered, and no amount of talking could repair the damage. Olivia tried to apologize, but it was too late. I couldn't listen to her explanations, her excuses. They felt hollow, like something she was saying just to ease her own guilt. I had already seen what I needed to see. I had already known, deep down, that this moment was inevitable. I spent the next few days in a haze, walking through our home, the place where we had once dreamed and built our future, and feeling like a stranger in my own life. The furniture that once felt like part of me, the little trinkets that reminded me of our shared experiences, now seemed like relics of a past that no longer existed. The weight of it all pressed down on me harder with each passing hour. I spent more time in my office, trying to drown out the pain with work, but even that couldn't distract me for long. The messages between Olivia and Brian, the late-night meetings, the cold distance between us, it all kept circling in my mind. I couldn't escape it. I thought about the life I had built with Olivia, the laughter we shared, the late-night talks, the dreams we had for the future. But those moments seemed to fade more with each passing day, replaced by the reality of betrayal. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that we were the same couple we had been years ago. One night, as I sat at my desk, going over documents I couldn't focus on, my phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. It was one of those brief texts that had become all too familiar in recent weeks. "I'm sorry for what I did, Mark. I never meant to hurt you." I stared at the message, my mind racing. She hadn't even come home yet that night, and here she was, sending me a text that tried to fill the emptiness that was left between us. Her apology was just another attempt to patch things up with words that no longer carried any weight. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I had nothing left to say. The next morning, I woke up early, my thoughts already in motion. I knew what I had to do. I had already waited long enough. I couldn't continue living in this limbo of uncertainty and pain. I wasn't just hurting from the betrayal, but from the fact that I had allowed it to go on for so long without truly facing it. I called the lawyer again, setting up a meeting for the afternoon. This time, I wasn't just seeking advice. I was ready to take the next step. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, I felt an odd sense of finality. This was the point of no return. I had the evidence, I had made up my mind. The decision to end my marriage wasn't something I had come to lightly, but it was the only choice left. Olivia's betrayal wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of the life we had built. The lawyer reviewed the documents, the assets, everything that needed to be sorted. She explained the next steps in the process. I listened, feeling numb, detached from the reality of it all. This was what it had come to, separating lives that had once been intertwined so closely. After the meeting, I left the office and headed home. Olivia was already there, sitting on the couch, her face pale. She didn't say anything as I walked in, but the look in her eyes told me everything. She knew what was coming. I didn't waste time. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady, though every word felt like it was being ripped from my chest. I'm done, Olivia. She closed her eyes, as though she were bracing herself for the blow. Her lips trembled, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. But I couldn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't let myself. I never meant for this to happen, she whispered, but I shook my head. I couldn't hear it anymore. The words no longer mattered. Then you shouldn't have done it, I replied coldly. You shouldn't have lied to me, Olivia. You shouldn't have betrayed me. For the first time in months, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, regret, maybe even shame. But it was too late. I had already made my decision. I turned away, walking to the door, and then stopped, my hand on the handle. I'll get my things, I said, not looking back at her. You don't have to worry about anything. I'm leaving. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't say anything more. The silence that followed was deafening. As I packed a bag and left the house, the weight of the decision seemed to settle in. It wasn't just about ending the relationship. It was about reclaiming my life. The life I had put on hold for far too long. The life I had let be defined by someone else's actions. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, and I knew the pain would last for a while. But for the first time in months, I felt a sense of freedom. I wasn't holding on to something that was already gone. I was walking away from the wreckage, ready to rebuild.